Welcome to The Business That Pays with Adam Tolliver from Artisan Financial Strategies, where we mind the business that pays you. In this podcast, we empower successful families and business owners to make informed decisions about their finances through courageous conversations. Through his expertise as a practicing investment advisor representative with Eagle Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor, Adam teaches you how to create a wealth ecosystem by combining a practical technical framework with your personal, family, and community values. Join us for this journey where Adam normalizes sustainable wealth building and gives you the keys to make courageous, proactive financial decisions.
You have worked hard to create your small or mid-sized business. It's your baby, and no one will ever understand or love it the way you do. Adam Tolliver of Artisan Financial Strategies respects that, especially when you are a business owner of color. Adam wants you to think ahead and plan for the best for your business and for your family. I'm Patrice Sikora, and that means planning retirement and a day when you can hand that baby over to somebody else to guide and grow. But Adam, why is talking about retirement so hard for small business owners?
There are so many reasons. And for business owners, I think to an extent, they are sort of hardwired in a way that makes the discussion around retirement itself an association that is just uncomfortable. And it boils down to identity and, this is my baby, this is what I do, this is what I've done. And they've had this singular focus of building a business for years. And even when they think about retirement, it's usually never, in a traditional sense where I'm no longer going to be working. So visualizing what the other side of that looks like tends to be very difficult for business owners. And in a lot of cases, I sort of describe it as business owners and their businesses holding each other hostage in a way. And we will definitely get into what that kind of looks like.
I think you really hit something important there when you talked about identity, though. I think that's the same thing for anybody with a career. But this is a business that you've sweated over. You've made this thing. This is who you are.
Exactly. And so to imagine walking away or stepping back, taking your hands off a bit and allowing someone else to do that, whether it's a transfer internally to a family member or a key employee, or it's selling to a third party, it can be very disorienting. And quite frankly, a lot of people who are the personality types who strike out and start a business and take that risk and build it up are wired in a way where you have to sort of believe what a lot of people don't believe. You have to have a mindset that a lot of other people don't. And with that comes, I want to be very careful and not call it hubris, but it is a certain level of confidence that can border on delusion. So as we get older, we're thinking, I'm a grinder, I'm a worker. This is what I do. This is my life. And you can see yourself working, until you're 70, 80, whatever. You just don't foresee a time where you won't be able to work. The challenge, though, is that for the health of your family, the health of your business, and the health of yourself, there does need to be a bit more attention paid to how can I at least position my business and myself in a way that I can continue to work in my business, but if I need to or want to at some point exit the business, it can survive, and my family and I can harvest the wealth that we've built in this company, in this enterprise.
And that is that deliberate exit strategy that you're talking about. How do business owners value their business? Do they understand that it may be worth more than the sum of all the parts?
Not always. And a lot of the times it's one of these sort of key mindset shifts that I think business owners can benefit from is when you're working in the business, it is your main source of income, right? And that is, of course, a focus is driving your income as a business owner. But what you also have to think about is how are you driving the value of that enterprise? And a business, a company, an enterprise is really only as valuable as it is transferable, right? Like you can't sell something to someone if they can't duplicate what you're doing. And when I talk about your business and an owner holding each other hostage, a lot of the time it is that business owner dependency. The business owner has the experience, the knowledge, the expertise, the relationships that no one else in the business has. And if you remove them from it, it's no longer as valuable to sell to a third party or even to be run by a number two if they aren't groomed to fully understand the scope of the value the business owner represents. And so that's a big part of it, is understanding what are the things that I need to do as a business owner to position my business in a way that it has some transferable value beyond myself. And that is a difficult and emotional journey,
I'm
to say
sure.
the least.
Yeah. Now let's look at some of the statistics you've got here. I was amazed. 50% of baby boomer business owners are 64 or older.
Yes. And that, of course, that number continues to rise by the day. An, an enormous amount of the small to mid-sized business owners in the US are approaching 64 or older or already 64 or older.
Now, 64 doesn't really mean, oh, you suddenly have to retire and you can't work anymore. But it does mean that hopefully you're getting the chance to, in the next 5, 10 years, slow down a little bit.
Absolutely. And a big part of that is even for those business owners who are much younger, about 50% of business exits are involuntary. And they're the
Oh,
result of some event. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the challenges and obstacles of planning for the exit from a business. But the older you get, you become more exposed to some of the risks that tend to trigger an exit for a business owner.
mhm.
And if you have not taken the time to put together a transition team, if you have not taken the time to put together an actual transition plan on paper, you can be caught flat footed. And in that process, unfortunately, so much is lost. I mean, the wealth in the business is lost. The future prospects of the business for your employees and for your family is lost. And so we want to be proactive as best as we can, so that even if you're 65 and you feel like you just hit your second wind, like you have no intention of leaving, we still want to be in a strong position to where we can be nimble if something happens and a change needs to be made.
Now, we all know that small business really powers the economy. It is 60% of the private sector in the U.S.
Yes, a little bit over 60%. It's about 63%, actually.
Is most of that the service sector?
Yes, yes. And it is a robust part of our economy. And with so many of our business owners continuing to age from that baby boomer generation, a lot of these businesses are going to be changing hands, and what that represents for communities across the country, for jobs, for products and services is truly a huge chunk of our economy.
Yeah, a small, Main Street business, if the owner who's been there forever and ever hands it over to someone else, will the locals still continue to come?
Yes, and that goes back to the idea of transferability, customer loyalty, customer diversification. Those relationships really do matter. And it gets into some of, what we might call the soft factors, but you can start to tease out and put a plan in place to make those types of transitions smoother, so that your community understands and knows what's happening when it's happening. And that is also, again, why so much of this planning in particular, you're working with business owners and their families and their communities, gets very, very emotional in addition to, And you've heard me say this many times. Our planning, what we do, is about money, but it's always going to be about so much more than that. And this is another of those times where you really get into the social aspect and the psychological aspect of what's really happening when we're talking about the transition of a valuable enterprise from one generation to the next, or from one family in some cases to another family or an outside entity if you're selling your business.
And you were talking about how the value of the business, the overall value, can be very harmed if there is no plan. How much of a person's wealth is actually tied up in their business?
On average, the average small to mid-sized business owner has about 80 to 90% of their personal wealth tied up in their business. The business represents the bulk of their balance sheet.
Hmm.
And of course, as you know, the business is illiquid. It usually, of course, spits off an income, provides an income, and that affords the owner, his lifestyle and the lifestyle of the employees that he pays. And sometimes that includes the family members. And so the value is in the income. And so being able to recognize that the value of the business on paper looks good on paper, but we need to have a good understanding of what the actual number is. Once we control for factors like the number one business owner, the founder, no longer being there, does it retain that value? How much of the value does it retain? Because if you're going to sell it and that was your number one source of income, what does that need to look like in order to maintain your lifestyle and to meet the other financial goals that you may have for yourself and for your family? And so that's a huge chunk of people's personal wealth. And if it is not done properly, unfortunately, you can leave a lot of money on the table just by not checking some key boxes on the way out the door.
Yeah, and there are a couple other numbers you've got here. Only 30% of family owned businesses survive to the second generation. Why
Yes.
so few?
Oftentimes, that is a misunderstanding or an assumption that is made by the first generation about the second generation. It's the second generation's skill or willpower. So,
Mm,
A, you know, is my son or daughter, is my nephew or niece, are they capable? Are they as capable of running this business the way that I have to continue its operation and growth? B, do they want to?
right.
um, and more and more now, I think that is something that people are understanding. I think historically we've fallen in love with the fairy tale, the idea of a family-owned business being passed down from generation to generation, and the assumption that junior is going to take up the mantle the same way senior did. And of course, those situations still occur every day. And those are fun stories for me as well. But the reality is, when you go business by business, a lot of the times those conversations are not had in an honest way. And so much of this podcast, we're talking about the importance of having courageous conversations and being able to be honest sometimes when it's just not going to feel good to do so. But if you know that you've got kids or a second generation of a family who are not as interested and maybe just want to do something else or be in another industry, or just, want to have a different career that has nothing to do with the family business, understanding, okay, so what does that actually mean for the continuation of the business? What are our other options?
Right. Which makes me look at this next number. 75% regret selling their business within 12 months. How much of that is resentment if it went to the next generation and the first generation is not pleased with the way things are being done?
That can definitely be a big part of it. A second part goes back to what we were talking about with identity.
Right.
And so my training in this area, I worked with the Exit Planning Institute and completed coursework with them for the goal of making sure that I understand in a constellation of a team. So working with other estate planning attorneys and accountants and business valuation and consultation experts, the big piece that is difficult to really quantify is making sure that that business owner has a life plan after they leave the business. So, you spent the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases building this business. It's who you are. It's, where you go. If you are the auto repair person, and that's who you've been in your community for years and years. Now, when you wake up in the morning, you're still the same person, but your life has this hole in it.
Oh yeah.
And so not having a clear plan about what your next chapter looks like, because again, like you said, 64, 65, even for a retiree from a traditional job, that's not the end of your life by any means, and especially not today, as life expectancy continues to creep up. So we're talking about a brand new chapter of life where people are still have 25, 30, sometimes 35 or 40 years to live. And so a lot of that regret comes from not having a clear idea of what the next chapter of life looks like, and now feeling lost and empty without having a certain purpose or drive.
So where can people go to find out their options? How can they learn they even have options?
That I will say, I volunteer. That's a big part of why I do this, and I particularly want to serve Black and minority owned businesses in this area, because the ownership of a business is really one of the best ways, if not the best way, to accumulate wealth, essentially to create wealth in one generation. And if we know what our options are, if we have a clear and intentional plan, we can maximize the probability of retaining that wealth in our families, if not also within our communities. And it's just critically important. And so that's one of the reasons that I took this path as part of my training and my education. And I continue to learn and sharpen my skills in this area so that business owners can feel empowered and informed about what their options are and what does it look like to have a clear framework for walking through building and protecting the wealth in your business and then harvesting that wealth for your family, so that the work is never for nothing. But what you don't want to do is spend years and years building the value of something and then only being able to extract 50% on the dollar of what it's actually worth.
About how long does it take before a business owner comes in and says, yes, I need a plan to sell, and actually getting that plan together?
So an engagement to do the initial framework planning is not going to take super long. But what we're doing is building out the framework itself, which we continue to work through. And a lot of that we'll talk about in the next part of this series to start to get into the details of what an actual exit strategy plan looks like. But what we're not doing is saying, okay, you raised your hand, you walked into my office and you said that you need a plan to sell your business. So you absolutely have to sell your business within the next year and a half, or this was a failure. What we want to do is start to lay the groundwork for increasing the value of your business, preparing you as a business owner to understand what your financial needs are for yourself and your family, and what your life plan is after you leave the business, and then what the plan is for the business after you leave the business. So those three things need to be in order. Then we work through a process where we get you to a decision gate. And at the decision gate, you have a decision to make whether, do I want to sell it now? Like we've gone through the work of increasing the value of the business. We've gone through the work of making sure that that value is transferable so that the business is no longer so dependent on me. And now we know what I need financially in order to be able to walk away from the business having extracted the full value that I deserve from it. So this decision is, do I want to sell and walk away, or transfer and walk away? Or do I want to keep growing the value? And we just repeat the process of continuing to drive the value until such a time comes where you are ready to sell, or God forbid, one of those key reasons that people get forced out of business without planning to happens. So you've been prepared either way, and you can make the decision at any point.
Yeah, tell me about those 5 Ds.
Yes, de-risking the business. So when we say 50% of exits from a business are not voluntary, the 5 Ds are the big risk. And those 5 Ds include death, disability, divorce, distress, and disagreement. And these are key things that can happen in your business that can devastate the operation of the business if you have not put in a plan to account for them. And that's a big part of how we accelerate the value of the business. We have to protect the downside. And that goes back to a key theme in my general 4 financial pillars. As far as philosophy goes, we always want to protect downside because more or less there are some things that are not inevitable, but are possible to happen that are worth planning for.
Do family members take part in this planning?
Yes, and that can be some of the most interesting and complicated part, as you can imagine. And it's not uncommon for on a transition team in an exit strategy to have a family psychologist or counselor, because there are a lot of emotions to be parsed through when it comes to decisions about what to do with your business. And when you're dealing with something, there are business owners who are running companies that are worth tens of millions of dollars. And if they have, 4 children, and 2 of the children are very active in the business and 2 of the other children are not, but the founder decides that she wants to leave the business ownership and split it all 4 ways even, how are the 2 who work in the business going to feel about that? Is that a conversation that needs to be had out loud? Or if she decides, these 2 kids have worked in the business, they've put in their blood, sweat, and tears. They're not just on the books because they have my last name. They bring real value to the company. Therefore, they deserve more ownership than the 2 who do not. That sounds fair logically, but as we know, we're dealing with family and we're dealing with money. And those are 2 things that logic don't always doesn't always matter, And so things like that, and difficult conversations that are not fun, that any family, has to have. What happens if mom or dad gets sick? What happens if one of you passes away too soon? What happens if one of you needs an extended leave away from the business? Those types of conversations are always going to be really important. And they have to be honest and courageous. Otherwise, the planning is going to have blind spots.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is part 1 of exit and succession planning. Adam, tell me what you want to discuss in part 2.
In part 2, we want to go through the actual planning process for how we set up a framework that allows you to identify what your wealth gap is, what your value gap is, and then what your life plan is. And your wealth gap is how much do you need as a business owner in order to sustain your lifestyle after you've walked away from the business and are no longer dependent on the business income for your income. The value gap is based on what your business is, how much is it worth right now relative to what the top businesses in your sector are selling for. And so the plan itself is designed to identify those things and then close the gaps. We need to figure out, how do we get from A to B? How do we increase the value of your business to make sure that you can get the maximum of what businesses go for in your sector, if it ever comes to that? And then how can we make sure that wealth-wise, you've put away enough? And of course, all of that includes de-risking the business, going through the 5Ds, all of that stuff. So we'll go into more detail on what that looks like.
Outstanding. Adam, how can listeners reach you if they've got some questions that they can't wait for part 2?
Sure thing. You can reach me at atolliver@artisanfsonline.com.
And Tolliver is Tolliver. And that's Adam Tolliver of Artisan Financial Strategies. To be alerted to new episodes of Adam's podcast, including part 2 of this series, The Business That Pays, subscribe with the subscribe button on this page. You can also share with the share button. I'm Patrice Sikora, and let's talk again later.
Thank you for listening to Business That Pays. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Artisan Financial Strategies or Eagle Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial professional provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment strategies.
Adam Tolliver, registered representative, offering securities through New York Life Securities, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a licensed insurance agency. 1125 Cambridge Square, Suite C, Alpharetta, Georgia, 30009, 404-219-9311. Financial advisor offering investment advisory services through Eagle Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. New York Life Securities, LLC, and Eagle Strategies, LLC are New York Life companies. Artisan Financial Strategies, LLC is not owned or operated by New York Life Securities, LLC, or its affiliates. Neither Artisan Financial Strategies, LLC, nor its advisors provide tax, legal, or accounting advice.